The morning sun had just started spilling light through the large glass windows of the hospital. The air was crisp and filled with a quiet energy that comes with a new day. Inside, the lobby was busy with patients, families, and staff moving in different directions. Amid this controlled chaos, a young nurse arrived, holding her bag tightly and clutching a folder with all her documents. Her uniform was crisp, freshly pressed, and she looked calm on the outside, though her heart was pounding with anticipation. Today was her first day at the hospital she had dreamed of working at for years. She had imagined this moment countless times. Walking into the hospital as a professional, being greeted warmly by colleagues, and beginning her journey to help people. She had imagined the smell of the hospital, the quiet hum of activity, and even the soft sound of her footsteps echoing in the hallways. But she had not imagined waiting for hours without anyone noticing her. She stepped forward, trying to make eye contact with the reception desk. A friendly nurse glanced up and smiled. "Good morning. You must be the new nurse. Welcome." The young nurse smiled back, grateful for the small gesture. She introduced herself, saying she was ready to start her orientation and eager to learn. The receptionist nodded politely and made a few phone calls, assuring her that someone would come to guide her shortly. "It shouldn't take long," she said. The young nurse found a seat in the lobby, adjusting her bag on her lap and trying to appear patient and composed. Minutes passed, then more minutes. She looked around the lobby and noticed people bustling past her. Doctors hurrying to their rounds, nurses carrying charts, and hospital staff moving as if the place ran like a well-oiled machine. She wondered why no one had come for her yet. Perhaps they were busy. She told herself to wait a little longer to be understanding. After all, this was a big hospital, and things could easily get hectic. The receptionist checked her watch and smiled politely but said nothing about who would arrive next. The young nurse shifted in her seat, trying to stay calm. She opened her folder and reviewed some notes she had prepared for today. She wanted to make a good impression, to show that she was capable and ready to contribute. She reminded herself of the hard work that had brought her here. Years of study, sleepless nights preparing for exams, and countless hours volunteering at clinics and smaller hospitals. All of that had led her to this very moment, yet she was sitting in the lobby, feeling invisible. An hour passed. The nurse glanced at the clock on the wall and then around the lobby again. She felt a small knot of worry in her stomach. She wondered if someone had forgotten about her, or if there had been a mistake in scheduling. She stood up, walked to the receptionist, and asked politely, "Excuse me, could you tell me when someone will be coming to guide me?" The receptionist gave a small apologetic smile, shook her head slightly and said, "I'm sure someone will come soon. The CEO is in meetings, and the orientation schedule is a bit backed up today." The nurse nodded, trying to hide the disappointment in her voice. She returned to her seat, feeling a little more anxious but determined not to show frustration. She began to notice the small details around her, the smell of antiseptic mixed with coffee from the cafe nearby, the sound of pages being called over the intercom, the soft footsteps of people walking past. She tried to distract herself, to focus on her own breathing and calm her nerves. Every few minutes, she would glance toward the entrance, hoping to see someone coming to guide her. But the door opened and closed with people who weren't there for her. It was as if the world had moved on while she remained in this bubble of uncertainty. Another hour slipped by. She tried to remind herself that first days could be overwhelming, that sometimes even experienced staff faced delays and confusion. But as the minutes stretched into 2 hours, a quiet fear began to settle in. She wondered if she had misread the instructions or if she had come to the wrong place. She checked her phone discreetly, looking for any messages or missed calls, but there was nothing. Her hands felt slightly clammy, and she took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Meanwhile, in the office at the top of the hospital, the CEO was completely absorbed in his work. He had meetings back-to-back with hospital board members, investors, and department heads. His phone rang constantly, emails piled up, and he barely noticed the time. The thought of a new nurse waiting in the lobby never crossed his mind. He was focused on the bigger picture, the budget, upcoming inspections, and the hospital's reputation in the community. In his mind, he was doing everything to ensure the hospital ran smoothly, but in the process, he had completely overlooked the human being waiting quietly below. Back in the lobby, the nurse tried to remain patient. She stood up, stretched her legs, and walked slowly along the waiting area. She smiled at passing staff, asking politely if they knew when someone would be coming for her. Each time, she received polite nods and reassurances, but no real answers. Her excitement for the day was fading, replaced by a heavy mix of frustration and disappointment. She had imagined a warm welcome, a brief introduction, and a friendly guide showing her the ropes. Instead, she felt unseen, a small part of the machine that no one had time for. Despite everything, she refused to give up. She reminded herself that she was here for a reason. She had worked hard, and she deserved this opportunity. She kept her posture straight, her face composed, and her tone polite when speaking to others. Inside, she fought to keep her confidence from crumbling. She remembered why she had chosen this career: to help people, to make a difference in moments of pain and uncertainty. And she resolved not to let this initial setback define her. As the hours ticked by, she noticed other new staff coming in for orientation. They were greeted promptly, introduced to their supervisors, and guided through the hospital. She felt a pang of jealousy but quickly pushed it away, reminding herself that everyone had different experiences and that patience was part of learning. She decided to sit quietly, observing the routines, learning the flow of the hospital, and preparing herself for when someone finally came to guide her. By late afternoon, the nurse had been waiting for nearly 3 hours. Her hope was waning, but she refused to leave. She knew that walking out would be a defeat, and she had worked too hard for that. She had survived long nights of studying and demanding internships. She had volunteered countless hours to gain experience. She could handle waiting a little longer. She focused on the patients walking by, noticing their struggles, their gratitude, and their resilience. In a strange way, observing them gave her strength. She reminded herself that being a nurse was not about immediate recognition, but about patience, perseverance, and quiet dedication. Little did she know, the CEO, who had remained unaware of her presence for hours, was about to discover this lapse. The upcoming board meeting would change everything, and the very person who had been ignored would soon become a silent witness to a lesson that even the highest-ranking leaders sometimes had to learn. But for now, the nurse remained calm, professional, and hopeful, holding on to the belief that her hard work, patience, and dedication would not go unnoticed forever. The young nurse had been sitting in the lobby for what felt like an eternity. Her uniform, once crisp and perfect, now showed small signs of fatigue. The sleeves slightly wrinkled, her hair out of place, and a faint crease forming from where her bag rested against her side. She had tried to remain composed, telling herself repeatedly that patience was a virtue, and that today's delay did not define her worth or ability. Still, as the minutes stretched into hours, a quiet worry began to creep into her mind. She looked around at the other people in the lobby. Some were chatting quietly with visitors. Others were absorbed in their phones or the little magazines scattered across the tables. She felt a pang of loneliness, knowing that while she was invisible to the leadership she had dreamed of impressing, everyone else seemed to have a clear place, a role, a purpose. She glanced at her watch and realized 2 hours had passed. Her stomach growled slightly from skipping breakfast in her rush to be on time. She had been so focused on arriving early, making a good first impression, that she hadn't thought to eat. Now, hunger joined the growing frustration in her chest. She tried to ignore it, focusing instead on breathing slowly and reminding herself that she was here for a bigger purpose. She practiced a mental list of all the patients she had helped during her training, the small victories that had brought a smile to someone's face or comfort to someone in pain. Those memories gave her strength, even as she felt overlooked in the lobby. Occasionally, she stood up and walked toward the reception desk, asking politely if there was any update about her orientation. Each time, the response was vague. "Someone will come soon," they said. "The schedule is a bit behind today." The words were meant to be reassuring, but with each repetition, they felt emptier. The nurse's hope began to waver, replaced by a dull, uncomfortable weight. She reminded herself again that first days were difficult for everyone, but the nagging feeling of being forgotten refused to leave. To distract herself, she started observing the hospital around her. The flow of people fascinated her. Nurses moved swiftly, balancing charts and equipment with precision. Doctors discussed patient care in quiet corners, their voices calm but confident. Patients and their families moved through the space with a mixture of anxiety and hope. She realized that even in moments of personal frustration, she could learn by watching the hospital at work. Every small interaction, every subtle gesture, seemed to matter in ways that weren't always obvious at first glance. She took mental notes, thinking about how she would handle her own patients when her shift began. Even as she tried to stay focused, a wave of doubt began to creep in. Had she misread the schedule? Did she arrive at the wrong department? What if she had made a mistake that would reflect badly on her? She shook her head quickly, trying to push the thoughts away. She had worked too hard to let doubt take hold now. She reminded herself of the countless exams she had passed, the clinical rotations she had completed, and the countless hours of volunteering that had prepared her for this very moment. She had earned her place here, and no delay or oversight could change that. As the hours passed, the nurse noticed other new staff arriving for their orientation. They were greeted warmly, given a brief introduction, and escorted to their respective departments. Seeing this made her heart sink a little. She wondered why she had been left waiting for so long. It wasn't just the delay, it was the lack of acknowledgement, the feeling of invisibility that stung more than anything else. She felt a flash of anger but quickly reminded herself to remain calm. She had learned during her training that professionalism often meant controlling emotions, even when faced with frustration. She straightened her back, smoothed her uniform, and sat quietly, refusing to let the situation break her composure. A nurse walked by carrying a stack of patient charts. The young nurse smiled politely and asked if she knew when someone would come for her. The passing nurse offered a brief smile but shook her head. "I'm not sure," she said. "Try to be patient. They must be busy today." The young nurse nodded, taking a deep breath. She knew everyone was busy, and she didn't want to appear ungrateful or impatient. Still, the wait began to feel endless, and the silence around her felt heavier with each passing minute. She thought about her family and friends, who had supported her every step of the way. They had believed in her when she doubted herself, encouraged her when she struggled, and celebrated her successes no matter how small. She imagined calling her mother or father to tell them about her first day, and the thought made her smile despite the frustration. She knew that one difficult morning would not define her career, but she also couldn't shake the feeling that being left waiting like this was unfair. She reminded herself that resilience was part of being a nurse. Patients relied on them in moments of crisis, and waiting quietly, staying composed, was a skill she could practice even in this small way. Around the third hour of her wait, she noticed a small boy in a wheelchair accompanied by his mother. They were struggling to navigate the lobby, the boy looking scared and the mother anxious. Without thinking, the young nurse stood up and offered to help. She guided the wheelchair carefully, asking gently how he was feeling and what brought them to the hospital. The boy clung to his mother but slowly relaxed as the nurse's calm voice reassured him. The mother thanked her repeatedly, and the young nurse felt a small but genuine glow of satisfaction. Even while waiting, she could still make a difference. It reminded her why she had chosen this profession. Not for recognition, but for moments like this, when she could bring comfort and support to someone in need. Despite this small victory, the longer she waited, the more the hospital's bustling energy contrasted sharply with her own isolation. She watched groups of nurses laughing quietly as they passed, doctors discussing cases in hushed tones, and patients being led to appointments. Life moved on around her, but she remained in her corner, unnoticed. She reminded herself to focus on what she could control: her attitude, her patience, and her professionalism. She refused to let the lack of attention diminish her dedication or her spirit. Inside the CEO's office, the day had been moving swiftly but not without challenges. Meetings had run over time, urgent emails demanded attention, and phone calls had interrupted nearly every attempt at focused work. The CEO prided himself on running a tight ship, on being efficient and in control, but the reality of the day had proven otherwise. Staff turnover, administrative issues, and hospital politics required constant navigation. In the midst of this, the presence of one new nurse waiting quietly in the lobby had escaped his attention completely. The idea that this oversight could have consequences never crossed his mind. Back in the lobby, the young nurse glanced around once more. The sunlight had shifted, casting longer shadows across the room. The day was moving forward, and yet she was still waiting. She thought about the patients she would meet later, the lives she could touch, and the responsibilities she had dreamed of taking on. She reminded herself that her journey was just beginning, and that moments like these, while frustrating, were part of the learning process. Patience, empathy, and resilience were as important as skill and knowledge. She took a deep breath, sat back in her chair, and resolved to continue waiting quietly, knowing that her dedication would be noticed eventually. She looked out the large windows at the city beyond the hospital, imagining all the people living their lives, each facing their own challenges. In that moment, she felt a quiet connection to the world outside, a reminder that her work as a nurse was part of something much larger. Her purpose was clear, even if recognition had not yet arrived. She knew she could remain composed, professional, and kind, no matter how long it took for someone to guide her through the next steps of her orientation. Hours continued to pass. The lobby gradually quieted as patient traffic slowed for the afternoon. The young nurse remained in her seat, observing, listening, and reflecting. She thought about her first day and how it could have started differently. She thought about the small victories, the patient she had helped, the skills she was ready to use, and the challenges that lay ahead. She reminded herself that this day, though difficult, was just one chapter in a much larger story. She looked down at her watch and realized the day was halfway gone. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "I can do this. I will not give up. I am here for a reason." That quiet affirmation brought a sense of calm over her. She adjusted her posture, smoothed her uniform, and waited patiently for the next step, determined to meet it with grace and professionalism. Little did she know the CEO, busy in his office, was about to become aware of the situation. The long wait, which had tested her patience and resilience, was about to turn into a moment that would teach lessons far beyond the routine of a typical hospital day. But for now, she remained composed, professional, and quietly hopeful, embodying the very qualities that made her a nurse in the first place. The young nurse had now been waiting in the lobby for several hours. The sun had moved across the sky, casting long, soft shadows through the glass doors. The energy of the hospital seemed to shift as the day wore on. The morning rush had passed, replaced by a quieter, slower pace. She had tried to keep herself occupied, reviewing notes in her folder, observing patients and staff, and even quietly helping a mother guide her child's wheelchair earlier. Despite her efforts, a weight had begun to settle over her. Not a physical weight, but the kind that presses on the heart, the weight of being ignored, unseen, and forgotten. Her thoughts wandered to the excitement she had felt when she first arrived. She had imagined a warm greeting, a brief introduction, and a friendly guide showing her the ropes. Instead, she had been left waiting, overlooked by those in charge. She wondered if this was a test, a cruel initiation into the realities of working in a busy hospital. She tried to remind herself that patience was a virtue, that professionalism often required enduring challenges quietly. Still, it was hard not to feel a little invisible, sitting there as the minutes stretched endlessly. Meanwhile, in the upper floors of the hospital, the CEO was finally finishing up a long meeting with department heads. Papers and reports were scattered across his desk. His phone had been ringing non-stop, and he was mentally exhausted. He prided himself on being efficient, on keeping the hospital running smoothly, but he was about to realize that efficiency sometimes meant more than just paperwork and schedules. It meant noticing the people who relied on him, even the newest members of his staff. As he glanced up from his notes, he noticed the clock. It struck a moment in the afternoon when the quiet of the office allowed him to pause for a second. He realized that he had been so consumed with meetings and administrative duties that he hadn't checked in on the new nurse waiting in the lobby. Suddenly, A flash of memory returned. He had seen her arrive that morning, but he had assumed orientation staff would take care of her. He frowned. Had she been waiting all this time? He rose from his chair and walked toward the window, peering down into the lobby below. First, he didn't see her. Then, as his eyes adjusted, he noticed a figure sitting quietly in the waiting area. It was her. The new nurse, still in her uniform, still holding her bag, still waiting. His stomach dropped. He felt a surge of panic, not because of the nurse herself, but because he realized how bad this looked. Hours had passed, and she had been left unattended. His mind raced as he imagined the board members arriving soon. How would this look to them? What impression would they form if they saw a new staff member being ignored? He rushed to his assistant, asking quickly, "Where is the new nurse? Has someone guided her yet?" His assistant looked confused. I thought she was being taken care of," she said hesitantly. The CEO's hands tightened on the desk. This was not just a minor oversight. This was a reflection of leadership, of accountability. He realized, with growing dread, that the situation could make the hospital appear unprofessional and careless. Back in the lobby, the nurse had been lost in her thoughts. She had reflected on her training, on the patients she hoped to help, and on the small victories that had brought her to this point. She had reminded herself to stay composed, professional, and patient. She had learned that being a nurse was not about recognition but about quietly making a difference. Yet, she could not deny that a flicker of frustration had begun to grow inside her. Hours of waiting without acknowledgement were difficult for anyone. She had hoped that someone, even a junior staff member, would notice her presence. Still, she remained calm, sitting upright, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Suddenly, the lobby doors opened, and the CEO hurried in. His usually composed demeanor was replaced by a rare urgency. He scanned the room, and his eyes landed on her. His heart sank. She had been waiting unnoticed all this time. He felt a wave of shame and embarrassment. How had he, a leader responsible for the hospital, let this happen? How could he face the board members knowing that a new nurse had been left alone for hours under his watch? He approached her cautiously, his steps quick but measured. I'm so sorry," he began, his voice carrying a mix of regret and urgency. The young nurse looked up, surprised, but remained composed. She had not expected the CEO himself to notice her. She listened quietly as he continued, "I should have ensured someone attended to you immediately. This is entirely my oversight, and I want to apologize." Her expression softened slightly, but she remained polite. "It's all right," she said calmly. "I understand things can get busy. I just waited, and I'm ready to begin whenever it's convenient." Her response, measured and professional, made the CEO realize something important. Despite the hours of being ignored, she had maintained her dignity, patience, and composure. She had not complained, not shown anger, and not allowed the situation to define her. The CEO felt a mixture of relief and continued embarrassment. He realized that leadership was not just about schedules, meetings, and decisions. It was about noticing the people who relied on him, valuing them, and ensuring they felt seen and supported. This young nurse had reminded him of a lesson that he had momentarily forgotten in the rush of administrative duties. He called over one of the senior nurses and asked them to escort her to the orientation room immediately. "Please guide her through everything she needs to know," he instructed, "and make sure this never happens again." The senior nurse nodded and smiled at the young nurse, offering her guidance and a warm introduction to the department. The young nurse followed willingly, her calm confidence intact, ready to begin her first shift in earnest. As she walked through the hospital, the CEO observed her quietly. He noticed the grace in her posture, the professionalism in her demeanor, and the patience she had shown while being ignored for hours. He realized that moments like these, though uncomfortable, were also opportunities for reflection and growth. He vowed silently that no staff member would ever feel overlooked on his watch again. Meanwhile, the young nurse settled into the orientation room. She introduced herself to the other staff present, asked polite questions, and listened attentively to the instructions being given. Despite the rocky start, she remained composed, professional, and eager to learn. She had turned a difficult beginning into an opportunity to show her dedication and resilience. The senior nurse who guided her noticed her calm and collected nature, and made a mental note that this young nurse would be an asset to the hospital. Back in his office, the CEO sat down and took a deep breath. He reflected on the events of the day, the hours of meetings, the countless administrative tasks, and, most importantly, the oversight that had left a new nurse waiting. He realized that leadership was more than efficiency. It was attention, awareness, and empathy. The nurse's patience had taught him a valuable lesson, that people's experiences mattered, and even small oversights could carry significant consequences. He made a note to review the hospital's onboarding procedures, ensuring that no new staff would ever be left unattended again. He understood that reputation was important, but the true measure of a leader was how they treated the people who depended on them. The young nurse, waiting quietly in the lobby hours ago, had reminded him of the human side of leadership, a side that could not be managed with schedules or checklists alone. By the end of the afternoon, the nurse had completed her initial orientation. She had met her supervisors, learned the routines of the hospital, and observed the flow of patient care. She had handled herself with professionalism and grace, despite the rocky start to her day. Her dedication and patience did not go unnoticed, and the CEO had begun to understand the weight of even small actions or inactions on the staff he led. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue across the hospital, the CEO reflected on the day's events. He realized that moments of embarrassment or discomfort were sometimes the most powerful teachers. He had learned that attention, empathy, and awareness were as important as authority, decisions, and policies. The young nurse, through her calm and patient demeanor, had shown him a lesson he would not forget. The nurse, meanwhile, felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had faced a difficult beginning, endured hours of waiting, and emerged with her composure intact. She had helped others even in her own time of uncertainty and had proven, first to herself and then to others, that patience, professionalism, and kindness were her strengths. She was ready for the challenges ahead, confident that her dedication would make a difference, not just for her patients, but also for the hospital as a whole. The hospital lobby had quieted down in the late afternoon. Patients had mostly moved on to appointments or left for the day, and the energy that had filled the hospital since morning had softened into a slower, almost reflective rhythm. The young nurse had finished her brief orientation with the senior staff and was now walking through the hallways, trying to familiarize herself with the different departments. Her steps were steady, her posture confident, yet there was a quiet tension that lingered from the morning hours of waiting. She reminded herself repeatedly to stay focused, to observe, and to learn. This was her first day in a hospital she had dreamed of joining, and she did not want anything to diminish her dedication. Upstairs, the CEO sat in his office, papers and reports still scattered on his desk, but his mind was no longer solely on budgets or schedules. His thoughts kept returning to the nurse. He could not shake the image of her sitting quietly in the lobby for hours, her patience unbroken despite being overlooked. He felt a mix of shame and urgency. The board members were due to arrive any minute, and he knew that if they saw what had happened, it could damage his reputation and reflect poorly on the hospital. He quickly stood up, straightened his jacket, and moved toward the door of his office. As he descended the stairs to the main floor, he rehearsed what he would say. He knew apologies were necessary, but he also had to show that the hospital ran efficiently and professionally. The thought of the board members arriving added pressure. Their eyes, he imagined, would notice every detail. He hoped they would focus on the strengths of the hospital, rather than the mistake he had made. But deep down, he knew this was not about optics alone. This was about leadership, responsibility, and respect for the people who made the hospital function. The nurses, the support staff, and every individual who dedicated themselves to helping others. Meanwhile, the young nurse continued her rounds through the hallways, greeting colleagues politely, observing patient interactions, and absorbing the rhythm of the hospital. She could hear the soft hum of machines, the distant sounds of pages being called, and the quiet murmurs of patients speaking with doctors. Each sound reminded her of the purpose she had chosen: to help people, to make a difference in moments of need. She felt a quiet pride in being part of this environment, despite the rocky start to her day. Suddenly, the lobby doors opened again, letting in a small group of formally dressed individuals. The nurse looked up and realized that the board members had arrived. Their presence brought an air of importance and authority, and she instinctively straightened her posture. The CEO followed closely behind, moving quickly to intercept the situation. His steps were purposeful, but there was a subtle tension in his movements, a hint of fear that the events of the day could reflect poorly on him. As the board members entered the lobby, they immediately noticed the young nurse standing quietly near the reception area. Their eyes lingered on her for a moment, noting her uniform, her calm demeanor, and the professional posture she maintained despite the circumstances. The CEO stepped forward quickly, placing himself between the nurse and the board members, speaking in a tone that blended urgency and explanation. "This is our new nurse," he said, his voice carrying a hint of regret. "She is just beginning her orientation, and I want to personally apologize for the delay you've witnessed." The board members exchanged glances, a mixture of curiosity and subtle scrutiny in their expressions. One of them, a woman with a keen eye for detail, raised an eyebrow and asked softly, "I see. And how long has she been waiting?" The CEO hesitated for a moment, then answered honestly, "Several hours. It was an oversight on my part, and I take full responsibility." The young nurse remained calm, listening to the conversation without interrupting. She had learned to maintain composure in challenging situations, and she continued to do so now. Her presence, steady and professional, seemed to underscore the very lesson the CEO had been forced to confront: the importance of patience, resilience, and professionalism, even when others faltered. One of the board members stepped closer, observing the nurse with a critical yet thoughtful gaze. "She has remained composed," the member noted quietly. "That is impressive. Many would have been frustrated or disheartened." The CEO nodded, feeling a mix of pride and embarrassment. Pride that the nurse had handled herself so well, and embarrassment that he had allowed the situation to occur at all. He realized that this moment would serve as a lesson not only for him but for everyone involved. The CEO turned to the board members, speaking with renewed sincerity. "This incident has reminded me of the importance of attention to detail in leadership," he said. "It is not enough to manage schedules and policies. We must ensure that every member of our team feels seen, valued, and supported." This nurse's patience and professionalism are a testament to the quality of people we have here, and it has inspired me to improve our processes immediately. The board members listened intently, their expressions softening as they observed the interaction. They could see the authenticity in the CEO's words, and the calm dignity of the young nurse reinforced the message he was conveying. One of the members nodded approvingly, saying, "It is clear that she has integrity and resilience. That reflects well on the hospital, and I appreciate your honesty and willingness to address the situation." The young nurse finally spoke, her voice calm and measured. "I appreciate the apology," she said gently. "I understand that mistakes happen, and I am here to learn and contribute. I am ready to begin whenever it is convenient." Her words carried neither bitterness nor resentment, only professionalism and a willingness to move forward. The board members seemed impressed by her demeanor, noting that she had maintained her composure despite the long wait. The CEO felt a wave of relief. The tension that had gripped him since discovering the oversight began to dissipate. He realized that the nurse had turned what could have been a negative situation into a moment of learning and reflection for everyone. Her patience had highlighted the importance of respect, attention, and professionalism, values that were essential not only for nursing but for leadership as well. One of the senior staff members stepped forward to guide the nurse to her next orientation session. She followed politely, walking beside them as they explained the procedures she would need to know. The CEO watched her go, reflecting on the events of the day. He understood that leadership was more than authority. It was about noticing, valuing, and supporting the people who made the organization function. The young nurse had reminded him of that lesson in a way that no meeting or report ever could. As the board members continued their visit, the CEO accompanied them, showing them different departments, explaining procedures, and highlighting achievements. Yet, his mind kept returning to the nurse. He knew that the first impression she had received could have been negative, but she had transformed it into a demonstration of patience and professionalism. That realization filled him with respect for her and a renewed commitment to ensuring that no employee would ever feel overlooked under his leadership again. Throughout the afternoon, the young nurse continued her orientation, meeting colleagues, observing patient care, and absorbing the rhythm of the hospital. She had begun her first day under challenging circumstances, yet she had turned it into an opportunity to demonstrate resilience and dedication. The board members, having witnessed the situation, were reminded of the human side of healthcare, the importance of patience, empathy, and professionalism. By the time the visit concluded, the CEO felt a mixture of relief, pride, and reflection. He had faced a moment of personal embarrassment but had learned a powerful lesson about leadership and accountability. The young nurse had remained composed throughout, showing that professionalism often shines brightest when circumstances are difficult. The board members left with a deeper understanding of the hospital's values, impressed not only by its operations but by the character of the people who worked there. As the evening approached, the nurse settled into her first shift, ready to assist patients and apply her skills. She had learned valuable lessons about patience, professionalism, and resilience, lessons that would guide her throughout her career. The CEO, observing from a distance, reflected on the importance of human connection, attention to detail, and genuine care for staff. He knew that this incident would remain a lasting reminder of the responsibilities that came with leadership and the quiet power of those who served with patience and dignity. The hospital, usually bustling with noise and activity, now carried a sense of calm as the day drew to a close. The nurse moved through her responsibilities with care. The CEO reflected on the lessons learned, and the board members had witnessed a demonstration of professionalism and patience that left a lasting impression. It was a day that would not be forgotten. A day that reminded everyone that leadership, patience, and respect were intertwined, and that even small moments could teach the most important lessons. The day had been long, and the hospital's usual rhythm had slowly returned to its quieter pace. Patients were leaving after their appointments, the hallways no longer crowded with staff rushing from one department to another, and the soft hum of machines filled the background as the evening approached. The young nurse had finally begun her shift properly, moving through the hospital with a calm confidence that only came from patience, determination, and a deep desire to help. The morning's challenges, the hours spent waiting in the lobby, had not broken her spirit. Instead, they had reinforced the qualities that made her a good nurse: resilience, professionalism, and kindness. She walked carefully along the corridors, greeting colleagues politely, observing patients, and learning the flow of the hospital. Each step she took reflected not only her training but also her ability to stay composed under pressure. She had already faced a test that morning, being overlooked by leadership and left waiting for hours, and she had passed it quietly without complaint. Her dedication was evident in the way she spoke, the way she moved, and the way she engaged with others. Her patience had transformed a difficult start into a demonstration of professionalism that would not be forgotten by those who had witnessed it. Upstairs, the CEO sat alone in his office, reflecting on the events of the day. The long hours of meetings, the stress of administrative work, and the sudden realization of the oversight with the new nurse weighed heavily on him. He had learned an important lesson about leadership, a lesson that could not be taught in any manual or through any policy. He realized that being a leader was not just about schedules, budgets, or appearances. It was about noticing people, valuing them, and ensuring that they felt respected and supported. The young nurse had taught him this lesson without saying a word, simply through her patience and professionalism. He thought back to the moment the board members had arrived and observed her waiting quietly in the lobby. He remembered the subtle glances, the way they had noted her composure, and the way his own mistake had been highlighted without malice or complaint. The nurse had turned an awkward situation into a demonstration of character, and the CEO felt both humbled and grateful. He realized that leadership required humility, and that sometimes the smallest oversights could have the greatest lessons. Meanwhile, the young nurse was attending to her first patient of the evening. A middle-aged man with a recent injury was anxious about his recovery. She approached him with a warm, reassuring smile and spoke in a calm, measured voice. She explained the procedures carefully, answered his questions, and provided comfort with her presence. The patient's tension eased, and he thanked her sincerely. In that moment, the nurse felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she was making a tangible difference. The events of the morning faded slightly into the background as she focused on what mattered most, helping the people who came to the hospital in need. Throughout the evening, she continued to move through her responsibilities with care and precision. She guided new interns, assisted patients, and observed the routines of the hospital with keen attention. Her ability to remain composed despite the challenges of her first day earned her quiet respect from her colleagues. Even those who had not witnessed the morning incident could see that she possessed qualities that went beyond technical skill, qualities that made her a natural caregiver and an asset to the hospital. Back in his office, the CEO decided to take action. He drafted new guidelines for onboarding staff, ensuring that no new employee would ever feel overlooked or ignored. He emphasized accountability, attention, and respect in the processes he created, making it clear that leadership meant more than authority. It meant care for the people who made the hospital function. The young nurse, though unaware of these specific changes, had already influenced a shift in culture simply by demonstrating patience and professionalism. As the hospital settled into the quiet of the evening, the CEO walked through the hallways, observing the staff at work. He passed the young nurse as she assisted a patient, and he offered a small nod of acknowledgement. She looked up, returned the gesture politely, and continued her work without distraction. That simple interaction carried a weight that words could not convey. A recognition of effort, a silent acknowledgement of patience, and an understanding that leadership and dedication were intertwined. The young nurse reflected on her day as she took a brief moment to sit in the staff room. The challenges she had faced, the long wait, the initial oversight, the uncertainty, had tested her patience and resolve. Yet she had emerged stronger, more confident, and more aware of what it meant to be a professional in a demanding environment. She knew that her journey was just beginning, but she felt prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. She had proven to herself, and quietly to the hospital, that resilience, calm, and dedication could overcome obstacles without anger or complaint. As the evening progressed, the hospital continued its quiet rhythm. Nurses checked on patients, doctors reviewed charts, and the CEO observed the flow of operations with a reflective mind. The morning's incident had already sparked change, a subtle but important shift in awareness and accountability. Leadership, he realized, was not just about decisions made in offices or meetings. It was about the small moments, the attention to individuals, and the respect given to every member of the team. The young nurse had reminded him of this truth in a way that would not be forgotten. Before leaving for the day, the CEO walked past the nurse one last time. She was assisting a patient, her focus entirely on the person in front of her. He paused for a moment, watching her work, and felt a sense of gratitude. She had faced a difficult start, endured a long wait without complaint, and conducted herself with professionalism that reflected the very best of what the hospital stood for. He realized that her patience and resilience had taught him more than any meeting or report ever could. Leadership, he understood, was strengthened by listening, observing, and valuing those around you. The nurse finished her tasks for the evening and paused to reflect quietly. She thought about the lessons she had learned, not just about patient care, but about professionalism, patience, and human resilience. She had experienced frustration, uncertainty, and a sense of being overlooked, yet she had remained composed and committed. She had learned that challenges could be transformed into opportunities, that setbacks could teach lessons, and that calm dedication often spoke louder than words. As she left the hospital, the sun had fully set, and the streets outside were bathed in the soft glow of evening lights. She walked with a sense of quiet pride, knowing that she had faced a difficult beginning and emerged with dignity and professionalism intact. The day had tested her patience, resilience, and character, but it had also affirmed her commitment to the profession she had chosen. She understood that every challenge, no matter how small, could become a lesson in patience, humility, and growth. The CEO, watching from his office window, reflected on the day one last time. He understood that the morning's incident could have been a disaster, but it had become a moment of learning, reflection, and improvement. He vowed to ensure that no staff member would ever feel overlooked again, and he felt a deep respect for the young nurse who had reminded him of what truly mattered in leadership and healthcare. Her patience, professionalism, and composure had inspired change and reinforced the values that made the hospital a place of care and compassion. The story of that first day would not be forgotten. The young nurse had turned a difficult beginning into a testament of resilience, patience, and professionalism. The CEO had learned the importance of attention, awareness, and empathy in leadership. The board members had witnessed the strength of character that existed within the hospital, and the culture of care and respect had been strengthened. In the end, what could have been a moment of embarrassment became a lesson in humility, dedication, and the power of quiet perseverance. As the night settled over the hospital, the young nurse prepared for the next day with a renewed sense of purpose. She had faced an unexpected challenge and had emerged stronger, ready to continue her journey with patience, kindness, and professionalism. The CEO, too, would carry the lessons of the day forward, aware that leadership was not measured by titles or authority, but by attention to people, respect for their dedication, and the ability to learn from even the smallest moments. And so, the hospital continued its work, filled with the quiet energy of dedicated professionals, guided by lessons learned and strengthened by experiences that reminded everyone that respect, patience, and human connection were the foundation of true excellence. The young nurse, the CEO, and the staff had all grown from a single day that began with oversight but ended with understanding, reflection, and a reaffirmed commitment to the values that mattered most.